A funeral should be sacred, a place for love and respect. But for General Evelyn Harper, it became a nightmare when a racist cop pointed a weapon at her chest in front of her son's coffin. What followed shook the entire nation. Millions of people demanding justice and a courtroom verdict that stunned everyone. What happened in those tense minutes? Before we explore this unforgettable story and all its twists, take a moment to relax, hit like, and subscribe so you won't miss more stories that matter. Outrage. She survived battlefields in Iraq and Syria, only to face a different kind of threat at her son's funeral on American soil. It was a chilly October morning at Quantico National Cemetery, Virginia, the kind of gray that didn't just hang in the sky, but settled heavy on your shoulders, like the world itself was holding its breath. General Evelyn Marie Harper had buried soldiers before. Too many. She had written the condolence letters, saluted the caskets, and stood tall through the bugle's mournful notes. But this time, the polished mahogany coffin carried her only son, Sergeant Caleb Harper, 27 years old, killed by a drone strike in Syria while shielding his squad. Evelyn wore her full-dress uniform, not because protocol demanded it, but because Caleb had once said, half grinning, "Mom, if I go, you gotta stand tall in your stars for me." So she did. The deep blue jacket hugged her frame, her 3 stars gleaming on her shoulders, her medals pinned in neat rows like chapters of her life. From the outside, she looked like a pillar of strength, but inside, her heart felt like it was unraveling thread by thread. The family arrived in a sleek black SUV, pulling up near Section 12, where the newest war dead were laid to rest. Evelyn sat in the back, sandwiched between her older sister, Loretta Banks, and Caleb's best friend, Master Sergeant Marcus Reed, who'd served with him in Syria. Her hands, steady through decades of command, trembled as she clutched a funeral program. Caleb's face stared back from the cover. His warm brown eyes, that easy smile, frozen in a photo from his last deployment. It didn't feel real. None of it did. As the SUV slowed, Evelyn caught the faint sound of a military band warming up, their notes drifting across the rows of white headstones. A line of Marines in crisp dress blues stood along the path, rifles at their sides, faces carved from stone. It was the kind of solemn precision only the military could muster, a ritual to honor the fallen that felt both comforting and crushing. "I don't know if I can do this," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible, eyes fixed on the window. It wasn't fear or panic, just a bone-deep exhaustion, like her soul was running on empty. Loretta squeezed her hand, her own eyes glassy with tears. "You've carried heavier loads, Evie," she said softly. "But this shouldn't be yours to bear." Marcus, usually quick with a joke to lighten the mood, stayed quiet, his jaw tight. He'd promised Caleb he'd look after Evelyn if the worst happened, and now here they were. The driver opened the door, and Evelyn stepped out, her polished shoes clicking on the asphalt. The cold air stung her face, but she squared her shoulders, her uniform drawing eyes from everyone nearby. A few Marines saluted as she passed. Whispers rippled through the crowd, her name, her rank, her story. First black woman to reach 3 stars in the Army, a trailblazer, a legend, but today, she was just a mom walking toward the hardest moment of her life. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, when her gaze landed on a police officer pacing near the parked cars. His cruiser idled, parked at an odd angle on the curb. Officer Derek Walsh, his badge glinting under the overcast sky, kept one hand close to his holster, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Something about the way he watched her, sharp, suspicious, made Evelyn's stomach twist. She'd faced down enemies in war zones, but this look on her own soil at her son's funeral felt like a warning. And it was only the beginning of a day that would break her heart all over again. Evelyn Harper stood frozen, her polished shoes rooted to the asphalt, as Officer Derek Walsh's voice cut through the quiet of Quantico National Cemetery. "Ma'am, I need to see some ID. Now." His tone was sharp, like he was barking orders at a stranger, not a three-star general in full-dress uniform. The crowd around her, family, friends, Marines, shifted uneasily, their murmurs swallowed by the heavy gray morning. Evelyn blinked, thinking maybe he was talking to someone else. She glanced over her shoulder. But no, his mirrored sunglasses were locked on her. Her stars gleamed on her shoulders, her medals clinked softly as she turned, yet Walsh's hand stayed glued to his holster. "I'm speaking to you," he said, louder now, taking a step closer. The air felt thicker, like the moment before a storm breaks. Evelyn's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the surreal weight of it all. Her son's casket waited just yards away, and here she was, being questioned like she didn't belong. "I'm General Evelyn Harper," she said, her voice calm but firm, each word measured like she was addressing troops. "I'm here for my son's funeral. My family's right there." She nodded toward Loretta and Marcus, who stood by the SUV, their faces tight with shock. Loretta clutched the funeral program, her knuckles pale, while Marcus took a half-step forward, his fists clenched. Evelyn raised a hand slightly to stop him. She knew how fast things could spiral. Slowly, she reached toward her coat pocket for her military ID, her movements deliberate. "Stop right there!" "Missouri," Walsh shouted, his voice cracking the silence like a whip. In one fluid motion, he yanked his pistol from its holster and aimed it at Evelyn's chest. Gasps erupted from the crowd. A child whimpered, clinging to their mother. Loretta let out a choked sob, whispering, "No, no, no." The Marines in the honor guard stiffened, their rifles still angled downward, but one young sergeant's eyes flicked to his superior, who gave a subtle shake of his head. "Stand down." Nobody wanted this to turn into a firefight, but the tension was a live wire. "I'm not armed," Evelyn said, her hands now raised, palms open, her voice steady as steel. "This is my dress uniform. You're making a mistake." Her eyes locked on Walsh's, searching for a flicker of reason behind those sunglasses. But his face was stone, his finger resting on the trigger. The casket gleamed in her peripheral vision, Caleb's name etched in gold, and for a split second she saw his smile, heard his laugh. She forced the memory down. She had to stay sharp, for him, for everyone watching. Walsh didn't budge. "I don't care what kind of costume you're wearing," he snapped, his lip curling. "Get on the ground, now." The word costume hit like a slap. Her uniform, earned through decades of service, reduced to a prop in his eyes. Marcus couldn't hold back anymore. "That's General Harper, you idiot," he growled, stepping forward, his voice thick with anger. "You're about to ruin your life. Lower the weapon." "Back off!" Walsh screamed, swinging the gun toward Marcus, who froze, hands up. The crowd recoiled, some pulling kids behind headstones. Loretta was crying openly now, her voice barely a whisper. "Evelyn, please, don't move. Just don't move." Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears, but she kept her hands steady, her breathing even. She'd trained soldiers to face threats like this. Calm under fire, always in control. But this wasn't a battlefield in Syria. This was her son's funeral, and the gun was in her face. "Officer," she said slow and clear, "I'm going to open my pocket and show you my ID. Slowly." Walsh's grip tightened on the pistol. "You reach, I shoot," he said, his voice flat, like he'd already made up his mind. The crowd was a sea of stunned faces. Marines, families, veterans, all watching a nightmare unfold. A woman in the back, one of Caleb's old squad mates, fumbled with her phone, recording. Another mourner, an older man with a bronze star pin, muttered, "This is wrong. This is so wrong." Evelyn's knees ached, but she stood tall, refusing to break. Then, Walsh's voice growled again. "Turn around. On your knees, hands on your head." She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, picturing Caleb's face, his voice. "Stand tall, Mom." But she knew she had to protect the people around her. Slowly, she started to lower herself to the ground, not out of fear, but to keep this from turning into a tragedy worse than it already was. The moment felt endless, like the world had stopped spinning. Then, from the distance, a shout broke through. "Walsh, holster that weapon!" It was a woman's voice, sharp and commanding, racing toward them, but Walsh's gun stayed steady, and Evelyn's heart sank. This wasn't over yet. Lieutenant Alicia Torres sprinted across the asphalt of Quantico National Cemetery, her boots pounding as she closed the distance to Officer Derek Walsh. "Holster that weapon, Walsh! Now!" she shouted again, her voice slicing through the stunned silence. Walsh's gun was still aimed at General Evelyn Harper, who knelt on the ground, hands behind her head, her dress uniform crisp against the gray morning. The crowd, Marines, mourners, kids, watched in horror, some clutching each other, others frozen. Walsh didn't flinch at Torres's command, his sunglasses hiding any hint of doubt. "I said lower it!" Torres yelled, now just yards away. When Walsh's finger stayed near the trigger, Torres acted fast. She grabbed his wrist with both hands, twisting hard, and knocked the pistol free. It clattered to the pavement, a harsh metallic sound that echoed like a gunshot. Walsh stumbled back, startled, reaching for the gun, but Torres was quicker. She pinned his arm behind his back, her voice low and fierce. "You're done. Stay still." Two other officers, who'd been directing traffic nearby, rushed over, cuffing Walsh and pulling him toward a cruiser. Evelyn felt hands on her shoulders, gentle, steady. It was Marcus Reed, Caleb's best friend, his face tight with worry. "Ma'am, you're okay. We've got you," he said, helping her stand. Loretta Banks, Evelyn's sister, hurried over, tears streaming down her face, and wrapped her arms around Evelyn. "Oh, Evie, I thought he was gonna—" She couldn't finish, her voice breaking. Evelyn's knees felt heavy, like they were carved from stone, but she stood tall, brushing dirt from her uniform. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. Caleb's casket sat untouched, gleaming under the overcast sky, surrounded by the honor guard who stood rigid, their faces unreadable. The band had stopped playing. The funeral, meant to be Caleb's moment, was shattered. Torres approached, her expression a mix of anger and apology. "General Harper, I'm so sorry. He wasn't supposed to be here. Are you all right?" Evelyn nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "I'm fine," she managed. Though fine was the furthest thing from the truth. She glanced at Walsh, now slouched in the back of a squad car, his face blank. The crowd whispered, some still filming, others comforting kids who didn't understand. Evelyn took a shaky breath, turning to Marcus. "Let's finish this, for Caleb." But the weight of the delay hung heavy. The cemetery staff, shaken, agreed to resume, but the ceremony was stripped down. No bugle, no rifle salute, just a quiet lowering of the casket. Evelyn stepped forward, her hand resting on the polished wood, her fingers tracing Caleb's name. "You deserved better, baby," she whispered, her voice so soft only she and her son could hear. Her eyes stung, but she didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. As the casket descended, Evelyn stood straight, her stars catching the dim light. Marcus stayed close, his hand on her elbow, while Loretta clutched her arm. The crowd watched in silence, the air thick with shared grief and outrage. Evelyn's heart ached, not just for Caleb, but for the moment stolen from him. She'd faced war, loss, and prejudice, but this betrayal on American soil, at her son's final farewell, cut deeper than any bullet. And as she walked away from the grave, she knew the world was watching, waiting for what she'd do next. The quiet of Caleb Harper's burial barely settled before the world exploded with noise. By noon, a shaky video from a mourner's phone showing Officer Derek Walsh pointing a gun at General Evelyn Harper's chest hit social media like a tidal wave. The clip, just 47 seconds long, captured Evelyn's raised hands, her calm voice saying, "I'm not armed," and Walsh's snarl, "Get on the ground." Within an hour, it had 1.2 million views, shared across platforms with hashtags like Honor General Harper and Justice for Caleb. Comments poured in, raw and angry. "She's a 3-star general at her son's funeral, and this is how you treat her? This is America's shame." The video spread from Quantico to every corner of the country, lighting up group chats, news feeds, and TV screens. Evelyn, still reeling in a private tent with Loretta and Marcus, had no idea her worst moment was now a national flashpoint. Marcus Reed, unable to stay silent, posted his own video from the cemetery's edge. His voice cracked as he spoke to his phone's camera, still in his dress blues. "Caleb Harper saved my life in Syria. He took shrapnel to shield our squad. His mom, General Harper, taught me what leadership means. Today I watched a cop pull a gun on her at Caleb's funeral. She wasn't a threat. She was a mom grieving for her kid." The video hit 3 million views by dinner time, shared by veterans, activists, and everyday people. Marcus's words, simple and real, struck a chord, turning Caleb's name into a rallying cry. Strangers left tributes online, photos of candles, folded flags, even sunflowers, Caleb's favorite flower. Evelyn's name trended alongside his, her face from old Army photos plastered next to the funeral footage. The Quantico Police Department scrambled, posting a statement on their website by 2 p.m. "We are investigating an incident at Quantico National Cemetery involving one of our officers. The officer has been placed on leave pending review." No apology, no mention of Evelyn's rank or Caleb's sacrifice. It was a sterile note, and it backfired fast. Social media erupted, calling it a dodge. "An incident? You mean a cop threatening a grieving mother?" one tweet read, retweeted 10,000 times. By evening, protesters gathered outside the Quantico PD station, holding signs. "She served, he drew a gun." They weren't loud, just steady, many in veteran caps or military jackets, standing in silent solidarity. Grace Coleman, a 70-year-old Vietnam-era veteran who'd been at the funeral, gave an interview to a local news crew. Her voice trembled, but carried steel. "I served in a time when black soldiers weren't always welcomed home. Seeing General Harper treated like a criminal at her boy's funeral, that's an insult to every uniform." Her clip aired on CNN, shared by millions. Politicians weighed in. Senator Rachel Holt Twitter, "General Harper deserves respect, not a gun in her face. This demands answers." Retired Colonel James Tate, who'd mentored Evelyn, went on MSNBC, his eyes wet. "She's the best of us. This isn't just about one bad cop. It's about a system that let him hold a badge." Evelyn stayed out of sight, holed up at Loretta's house in Fredericksburg. She sat in a recliner, still in her uniform, too drained to change. Loretta brought her coffee, but it went cold on the table. Marcus stood guard outside, turning away reporters. The TV droned in the background, showing her face, Caleb's smile, and that awful video. Evelyn's phone buzzed with messages. Soldiers she'd led, Gold Star families, even strangers. One text, from a Marine widow in Ohio, read, "I buried my husband last year. I can't imagine facing what you did. You're not alone." Loretta started stacking letters from neighbors, veterans, kids, dozens by nightfall, some with sunflower drawings. The story wasn't just news. It was a mirror, forcing people to face hard truths. Young people on YouTube, from college kids to activists, posted reaction videos, their outrage raw. Middle-aged veterans shared stories of their own brushes with bias, their comments flooding X. By midnight, Honor General Harper was everywhere, a call for justice that wouldn't fade. Evelyn, staring at a photo of Caleb on her phone, whispered, "This was supposed to be your day." But the world wasn't done with her story, or her fight. 6 months after Caleb Harper's funeral, courtroom 4A in Richmond's federal courthouse was packed, the air thick with tension. General Evelyn Harper sat in the front row, dressed in a simple navy blazer, no medals, no stars. Just a mom facing the man who'd turned her son's burial into a nightmare. Officer Derek Walsh, in a plain gray suit, sat at the defendant's table, his face unreadable, no badge to hide behind. The gallery brimmed with veterans in dress uniforms, reporters scribbling notes, and families clutching tissues. Loretta Banks held Evelyn's hand, her grip tight, while Marcus Reed sat on her other side, his jaw set. The trial had gripped the nation, fueled by that viral video of Walsh aiming a gun at Evelyn's chest. Today, after weeks of testimony, the jury would decide. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Karen Ellis, laid out the case with precision. She played the video again, the courtroom dimming as Walsh's voice boomed, "Get on the ground!" Evelyn's calm response, "I'm not armed," echoed, her hands raised in her gleaming uniform. The room was silent, some jurors wiping tears. Ellis revealed Walsh's record: 7 complaints for excessive force, including one where he'd pulled a gun on a black Navy lieutenant at a traffic stop, dismissed as a misunderstanding. "This wasn't a mistake," Ellis said. "It was a pattern, and General Harper paid the price at her son's funeral." Lieutenant Alicia Torres took the stand, her voice steady. "I told him to lower the weapon. He refused, even after I said it was General Harper. I had to knock the gun from his hand." Walsh's lawyer, a wiry man named Greg Vance, tried to spin it. "My client acted on instinct in a high-pressure moment." Torres shut him down. "Instinct doesn't mean pointing a gun at a grieving mother," Marcus testified next, his voice low but fierce. "I served with Caleb. He died saving us. General Harper was there to honor him, and Walsh treated her like a criminal. She never flinched, but I'll never forget her on her knees." The jury leaned in, some nodding. Then Evelyn took the stand. The room hushed as she spoke, her eyes steady. "I don't want revenge. I want accountability. No mother, no soldier should face a gun for mourning their child. I've served this country for 30 years. That day my uniform didn't protect me, not from him." She glanced at Walsh, who looked down, his hands folded. "This isn't just about me. It's about making sure this stops." Her words hung heavy, every syllable landing like a stone. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. At 3:17 p.m., they returned. The foreman, a middle-aged woman, read the verdict. Guilty on all counts: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, civil rights violation, abuse of authority. The judge, a stern man with gray hair, didn't hesitate. "Derek Walsh, you are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, no parole." A ripple of gasps and quiet cheers spread through the gallery. Veterans hugged, some cried. Loretta squeezed Evelyn's hand, whispering, "It's over, Evie." But Evelyn's face stayed calm, her eyes fixed on the judge. Walsh was led away in cuffs, his head low, no words, no apology. The crowd outside the courthouse erupted, chanting, "Honor General Harper," as cameras flashed. Evelyn stood, smoothing her blazer, and walked out with Marcus and Loretta. Reporters swarmed, but she didn't speak. Not yet. The weight of the verdict settled on her, not as relief, but as a quiet resolve. She'd fought for Caleb, for herself, for every soldier who'd ever felt unseen. As they reached the courthouse steps, a young Marine in the crowd saluted her, his eyes shining. Evelyn returned the salute, her heart swelling with pride for her son's legacy. But the fight wasn't over. She knew the world was still watching, and her next words would carry Caleb's name further than any courtroom could. Evelyn Harper stood on the Richmond courthouse steps, the cool March air brushing her face as reporters pressed in, microphones hovering. The crowd, veterans, families, strangers, watched her, their signs reading, "Honor General Harper," swaying in the breeze. Loretta stood to her left, eyes red but proud, while Marcus flanked her right, his dress blues sharp. Evelyn hadn't planned to speak, but the weight of the moment, Walsh's guilty verdict, Caleb's stolen funeral, the nation's eyes on her, pulled the words out. She raised a hand, and the crowd hushed. "I didn't come here for vengeance," she said, her voice clear, steady. "I came so no mother has to kneel in fear at her child's grave. Caleb died believing in service, in this country. What happened at his funeral wasn't just one man's mistake. It was a failure of a system that let him carry a badge. We have to do better." She paused, her gaze sweeping the faces before her. "You don't need a uniform to deserve respect. You don't need to lose a son to grieve in peace. This is our mirror, America. Look at it." The crowd erupted, clapping, some shouting, "Amen!" Her words hit the airwaves that night, replayed on every major network, quoted in classrooms, and dissected on YouTube. Young people shared clips, their comments raging against injustice. Veterans nodded, seeing their own struggles in her story. A week later, Evelyn slipped away from the spotlight, driving alone to Quantico National Cemetery before dawn. She carried a folding chair and a single sunflower, Caleb's favorite, its bright petals glowing in the early light. She set the chair by his headstone, the grass still fresh, and sat. The silence wrapped around her, broken only by the rustle of leaves. She didn't speak, just traced his name with her eyes. Sergeant Caleb Harper, Bronze Star, forever 27. Memories flooded in, his goofy laugh, his stubborn streak, the way he'd hug her before deployments, saying, "Stay tough, Mom." She smiled, her first real one in months. Before leaving, she knelt, pressing her palm to the cool stone. "I did what you'd want, kid," she whispered. "I stood tall." She placed the sunflower gently, its yellow stark against the white marble. As she stood, a groundskeeper nearby tipped his cap, a quiet nod of respect. Evelyn walked back to her car, her heart still heavy but lighter than before. The world hadn't stopped talking about her. Letters poured into Loretta's house, some from kids drawing sunflowers, others from Gold Star families sharing their pain. Then came the news that made her chest swell. A scholarship in Caleb's name, funded by veterans and strangers alike to help military kids go to college. It was his legacy, shining brighter than any medal. Evelyn didn't chase the cameras or the headlines. She went back to work, training soldiers, her stars still on her shoulders. But her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a call, a spark. It lived in the protests, the policy debates, the quiet conversations at kitchen tables. And it carried a challenge. Don't let this fade. Speak up when you see wrong, especially when it's hard. Because silence lets injustice breathe, but truth fights back. Evelyn knew Caleb would have grinned at that, maybe tossed in a joke. She carried him with her, every step, knowing his light and her fight would keep burning, long after the world stopped watching. We learn from Evelyn that silence fuels injustice, but speaking truth, even through pain, builds a better tomorrow. It's a call to act, challenge bias, honor sacrifice, and listen to those who've earned their stars, seen or unseen. You don't need a uniform to make a difference. You just need the heart to stand up. Let's carry this forward in our own lives. Call out wrong, support the hurting, and keep the light of hope burning. If Evelyn's story moved you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch more stories of resilience and truth that inspire us to be better. Hit that button, join our community, and let's keep these lessons alive together. Because every voice matters, and every story can change the world.